Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to this week's episode of the Flowerlounge Podcast. I'm really excited for having two guests. Usually we only have one, so this will be a really fun conversation. First, we have Sharon Fisher with us, who's a board certified as both a psychiatric and adult primary care nurse practitioner. We love nurse practitioners. She's passionate about helping women reclaim their inner strength, and after a long fertility journey, she became a mother at 38. And we also have Emma Williams, who's a researcher and writer whose work in women's health and reproductive health has taken her to various countries in Asia and Africa. She overcame her own fertility challenges, becoming a mother at age 35 and again at age 37. And they've been friends for over a decade, supporting each other through major life milestones, building their careers. And one night when celebrating Emma's 40th birthday, she mused that, wouldn't it be great if there was a book with accurate, supportive information for women having babies later in life? Yay! So the next day, Sharon called her to propose writing one. And so along the way, they've built a network of like-minded writers and healers serving women through one of the most profound changes of their lives. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you guys. Hi.
Hi, we're thrilled to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So we start off every podcast with a fun little exercise where you just like take a second to close your eyes and go back to the time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees. And just think about what you were doing then, what you were up to, who you were with. See if you can identify a favorite flower or botanical. And then reflect on the 3 words you would use to describe its personality. And then whenever you guys are ready, just one at a time, each of you can share what you were thinking of, your favorite, and your 3 words. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I'm a bit of a cheater because I've listened to past podcast episodes, so I knew this was coming.
Okay.
And when I listen to past episodes, I would always think, what would I say in this place? And I always think of clover. There were a lot of fields of clover around my house growing up, and it was very soft and comforting, and invited like contemplation because we would make the like clover necklaces and look for 4-leaf clovers.
Oh, that's so great. So what would be the 3 words you would use?
I said soft, comforting, like invites contemplation, or
Soft, comforting, invites contemplation. I love that. What about you?
So what came to mind to me was at an elementary school at recess, I had my little gang of girls that we always played together. And we always played around this huge maple tree that had like all these gnarly roots, and we would make it like our home or whatever. It was always an integral part of the game. And I sort of always had this obsession with woodland creatures. So I always really liked the idea of the animals that lived in there. And I think it made me feel, when I think back to it, really nurtured and safe, and it was steady. It was there. It was a big, big maple tree, you know.
Nurtured, safe, and steady. Okay, so if you already know the answer then, if you've listened to the previous podcast, that those 3 words would describe the way you bring your gifts into the world. Does that resonate with both of you?
I think that's definitely, Emma is definitely contemplative and soft and warm. And yeah, I would say that's true for you.
Emma, what do you think about Sharon's words? Is that her?
Yes, definitely.
That's so great. So yeah, I mean, where should we start? I know you guys wrote an amazing book called Beyond the Egg Timer, a companion guide for having babies in your mid-30s and older. And there's so much we can talk about. It's so interesting when I'm looking at all the information I have about you two, in terms of having babies from ages 30 plus. And I always think that like the best age to have a kid is 35. In my mind is like, let's talk about having babies in our 40s. Like, what are your thoughts about, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, I mean, have a really close friend who had a baby at age 50. So, where do we start? Where do we start the conversation?
So I think that's something that we have to be explicitly clear about, is that neither Emma nor I feel that there is the one set way to be or the one right age to be. What we wanted to do is create a normalizing and validating experience for women who are having their children what's considered older, right? And it's relative, right? Because you just said you had a friend who had a baby at 50, which, and I was actually just at a meeting with a bunch of perinatal professionals, and one was saying how at a freestanding birth center that a relative of hers is a midwife who owns, just had the oldest was a 54-year-old natural conception, natural birth at a freestanding birth center. So, and it was, I think it was her 5th or 6th kid, so it wasn't her first rodeo, but but what we feel is it's the right time for you when it's the right time for you. And we wanted to just create a space for women who are older, because in our society, there's a lot of shaming and judging if you're outside of this, I think 25 to 35 range, right? If you're too young, there's lots of shaming and judging. And if you're too quote unquote old, lots of shaming and judging. So I think that would be our stance on, yeah.
So when oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, especially for women who find that it takes longer than they would like, if they're in their mid-30s or older, they may sort of start to wonder if they brought this on themselves, or people may say that to them. So we wanted to provide support, especially for women in that situation.
Yeah, so regardless of age, say, 20s, 30s, 40s, what do you see is the usual amount of time that women are trying to get pregnant? Like, are you saying that it's taking women longer to get pregnant, is what I'm imagining, when they actually do decide to have kids? And why do you think women are choosing to have kids later in life?
So what we essentially know is, and one of the things we wanted to really counter was this notion that 35 was this huge fertility cliff, because that's not medically accurate. What the statistics show us is that about 80% of couples and the men's age matters too. This is another point that's really important. Although men can father a child typically till the day they die, their chances go way down. Sperm quality and quantity declines steadily through a man's life. So it really is both the male and female partner. So in a couple under 35, about 80% will get pregnant within 6 months. It's about 60% of people between 35 and 40 so it's a decline, but it's still 60% can expect to get pregnant in that time frame, which is pretty good. And about 80% will be pregnant within 1 year of regular unprotected intercourse. So again, it's not really a cliff.
Those are pretty high chances.
They're pretty high chances, definitely. And in terms of why, so our book is really, in a lot of ways, I like to think of it as a qualitative study, because we just kept interviewing women who had their children over 35 until the stories started repeating. And then we stopped and drew out the common themes. And there were 3 themes that we found. One was indecision about whether they wanted to be parents or not. The other was infertility. So this included a lot of women who actually tried to have children before 35, but just took, such as myself, but it just took quite a few years. And so then they were over 35 by the time they actually got pregnant. And the lastly is what we call in due time. And this is anything from financial strains that prevented somebody from having a child, to having to maybe care for a sick parent, or just anything that can happen in life. Perhaps getting married to somebody in your 20s and realizing it's the wrong marriage, so you get out, and then not finding a partner and not wanting to do it solo. And so I guess in the biggest depending on your philosophical framework, these could all be choices at some level, but we also feel that there's other ways of looking at it too. Sometimes life just happens. And then there are certainly some women, like you were saying earlier, who just think like, well, why would I have a baby too young, for a multitude of reasons, right? but the one common theme we found amongst all of the women were that they really held parenting as very sacred and took the responsibility of bringing a child into the world very, very deeply, and were very thoughtful and conscious about the decision to have a child.
And do you feel like women in their 20s these days are still pressured to have babies while in their 20s?
I think it depends a lot on where you live, and there's a real big urban-rural differential, and definitely in urban areas, women are much more likely to wait longer. It also depends a lot on education level, I think, especially if you're in a field that requires like a graduate degree, then you get pressure to wait until after you've done that to have babies. But then people in other fields might feel pressured, earlier.
And so once women are ready to get pregnant, what are the ways to enhance your fertility beyond 30, 35, 40?
Yeah, so everything goes back. Food is medicine. Food is medicine. So a really clean diet full of a plant-based, not that you can't have meat, but a plant-based diet that's clean, low sugar. It's not that you have to get rid of caffeine, but if you're having like 30, 40 ounces of coffee a day, which a lot of people do, right? A Starbucks Grande, which is their small, is 16 ounces, I believe. So if that's like your norm to go get that in the morning, that's a lot of coffee just you're starting with.
Do you recommend that women who are trying to get pregnant totally eliminate coffee altogether, or just minimize it to a certain amount?
So Emma and I were very clear in our book that we're not giving any kind of like specific track, and because there's tons of books out there that are great. Like we between the two of us, I think we may have read all of them. I think what's right for you is what's right for you. Now, that being said, it really depends on who you ask, right? Like all the Chinese medicine folks that I read, at least, and of course I'm not an expert, were saying get rid of it because it's acidic, right? But then there's other people who say it doesn't matter. What we do know from Western medicine is that really, really high caffeine intake can increase the chance of miscarriage. And I forget the actual cutoff, but these are the women who are drinking like a pot of coffee a day, which sounds like a lot, but if you have 2 or 3 16-ounce cups of coffee, you're at a pot. Or if you have a couple iced teas in there, Coca-Colas. And I'm not dissing any of these brands or any of these things. It's just the excessive-ness.
Well, you just add up. You have a little bit here and a little bit more there and some in the afternoon, right? And then before you know it, it's like you've got like huge amounts of caffeine that you didn't really know were so much.
Right. So I think really getting back to the clean diet, I think we're learning more and more about endocrine disruptors in our society. And so all of the plastic bottles and, everything says BPA free, but there's different types of BP, name your letter after it, that are in there. And beyond that, what we do is instead of giving a formula, we help people navigate their own way, figure out what speaks to you and what's true to you and what feels good. Because at the end of the day, if you don't feel comfortable, right, then nothing's going to work. So like for me, like yoga and meditation were huge, but those things are very comfortable to me and I love them. So whereas I think there was a diet we read, didn't we read, Emma, this diet that had like, we were supposed to eat like 20 ounces of whole fat dairy a day or something. It was something crazy. And I'm like, I like cheese, but that's too much,
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah. I mean, is there something that you each want to share individually as like your personal stories and what worked for you? Because I just think stories are so powerful. As you were trying to get pregnant, or something that really worked for you individually?
Yeah, I mean, I was struck when we interviewed the women for our book. Everyone has a slightly different path, and like Sharon was saying, some of us loved going to yoga, others felt like it gave them too much time to think about what was going wrong. So we kind of have a list of 8 coping techniques that we found were approaches that worked for a lot of people. I don't know. I honestly don't know if there was one thing that worked. But one thing I'm grateful for is that after I had a miscarriage, it inspired me to start getting acupuncture, which was, great. experience, and I think helped in lots of ways. I don't know, Sharon, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, so to me, the biggest thing was probably the law of attraction, and really trying to manifest the baby. And I initially got into it through Rhonda Byrne's stuff, and she always says, like, start with something small. And so I actually manifested a chocolate chip cookie for myself, and and then I was hooked on it. I really was. I was like, whoa. And so
that was like a little test that you did.
Yeah. I started with that. And the story is actually in the book. It was really random. I mean, it wasn't, because people were like, oh, well, cookies are everywhere, that's just coincidence. But it was the way that it happened. I got home and my husband had it for me, and like, that just would never happen before, right? So yeah, it was really cool. And that got me hooked, and it really changed my mindset, because one of the problems that my husband and I had is we come from not long lines, but we have a lot of infertility in our families, and they know that there is some level of genetic component to it. And so, like, we just went into it knowing it was going to take a while. That was our mindset. In retrospect, I think that was really wrong. I mean, you can't go back, but I think that set us up for a little bit of failure. Now, that being said, I also always knew that we would be parents some way, somehow. So I was always optimistic, but really changing my mindset into manifesting, being fertile and full of life, and thinking about it not just in my uterus, but just in the ways that I bring life and grow things. So I think that was important to me. And I also did a lot of acupuncture. I also changed my diet several times. I got off of coffee because I did a lot of the Chinese medicine stuff, that it wasn't the caffeine, but it was the acidity.
You didn't sign up for that. How many ounces of?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I've never done. Although now that I have kids, I'm kind of like heading back that way. But yeah, that, and then what else did I do? We did Western fertility treatments as well. I did IUIs and Clomid and trigger shots and Femara. And we also followed the fertility awareness method. So I think it was the combination. I mean, one thing we try to really help people understand is that all babies are miracles. I mean, the fact that these cells get together, the fact that they multiply and divide in the correct way to support life.
It's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy, miraculous.
Insane.
Yeah.
It is totally insane.
So yeah, and I think being able to hold that there isn't just one way of doing it is important for women, because they get really caught up in it, especially women who are a little bit older, who are like, now I'm ready, right? I waited all this time, now I'm ready, let's go. And it just doesn't always work that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, the other thing
go ahead. No,
I was going to say, I forgot to mention my puppy, which I talk about in the book, was I felt like after I had my miscarriage, I was so down in the dumps, and then this friend of ours gifted us a puppy.
Oh my
gosh. That really took my mind off of it and gave me something to pour my maternal energy into. And then maybe a year or so later, I found out that she'd had 5 miscarriages. So she knew what she was doing when she gave me the puppy.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet. I never heard of that. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And why do you think it's so not talked about, miscarriages? I mean, I like, being an older woman myself, as I've gotten older and had friends have miscarriages, I've realized, like, wow, this is such a common thing. Like, almost every woman's had a miscarriage. Why aren't we talking about it more? Or do you find that, just at a certain age we start talking about it? But in my 20s, I never heard about women having miscarriages.
Yeah, I feel like it's still, everything fertility related is still kind of a taboo subject in a lot of ways. And that's another reason that it was so surprising to me when it happened to me, was because I had no idea how common it was. And then, of course, after it happens, everyone's telling you their experiences. Yeah. So.
I had another question, but I forgot.
The other thing I think is it's more known now, because it used to be much more difficult to get a pregnancy test, especially earlier in pregnancy. And now it's like everyone has these super high, the rapid tests that are really sensitive, so you can detect more like early miscarriages than we could before.
Right. So we just know about more of them than in the past.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds like, you two are like the ultimate fertility guides, in that you're not super strict about certain protocols, and you're really more talking about like a mental, emotional, not game, that's not the right word, but it's like framework or mindset. It sounds from what you're saying that it's the most important for mamas to just feel comfortable in their bodies and feel like juicy and fertile, right?
Right. Our angle is definitely the emotional, psychological part of the journey. There are lots of experts, fertility, reproductive endocrinologists, acupuncturists, Chinese medicine gurus, nutritionists who can tell you this and that and molecular this and that and all that. We're here to help, guide people through the emotional and psychological part. And a lot of what inspired us was, as we started talking to more and more women, we were meeting women and part of this was that I was like always very open about my journey, and I'm also kind of that person that everybody just tells all their problems to. So, but I was meeting more and more women, and Emma was too, that just were giving up on the journey. They were just giving up because it was too hard, not because they decided they didn't want to be a parent. That's fine if that's what you want, but it was just too hard. And we wanted to help people realize their goal of parenthood and not have that obstacle of the psychological problems that can come with it. Because there's very little accurate information out there.
When you say give up, do you mean like, when we've tried every month and we've got the sticks, the ovulation sticks, and we're tracking our cycle and we know peak ovulation times and we're trying at those times, and then it just never happens. So women just feel like, oh my God, I'm just not going to try anymore. Is that
I think that, I think there's lots of different scenarios. Like, for example, I was at a party once and I was talking to a woman, and she said, well, we were actually at a baby shower, a mutual friend's baby shower. And I guess she had heard I was still trying at that point in time. And she said, yeah, I don't know. I guess we're just infertile. Or she goes, I guess we just waited too long. And I was like, well, how old are you? And she's like, I'm 36. And I just sort of fell out of my chair, right?
So young.
And then I said, well, how old is your husband? And she goes, he's 50. And I'm like, well, first of all, chances are the problem is your husband. If there is a problem, it might not even be a problem, but their problem could be your husband is more likely than you at 36. And I said, well, have you considered a fertility evaluation, right? And she goes, well, we can't afford that. And I'm like, but in the state of Maryland where we live, health insurances are mandated to pay for the evaluation. They don't have to pay for anything else, but they have to pay for the evaluation. And she was like, oh, so it was like that, like a lack of information. To even know when you're fertile and to know what kind of resources you can have. And we have a nice resource list in the back of our book, and Resolve, the National Infertility Association, is listed because they can actually tell you what benefits you're eligible for in what state. And then also understanding we have a navigation, a chart and a way to navigate, because even if you can't afford fertility treatment, going for the exam can let you know, is everything okay? And then it's a question of just trying more or trying some other routes. Or is there really, is there endometriosis? Is there fibroids? Is there a low sperm count, cysts or something? And then some of those things you should probably have fixed anyway, right? There's so many women walk around, with every month they're in bed for a week with their period, and they don't understand that's not normal, but maybe they have severe endometriosis, and that should be, whether they want children or not, should be corrected. And then if the case is that's corrected and that was your issue, but there's a medical need, maybe your insurance will pay for it because it was a medically based thing, not for fertility, right? So there's lots of ways of navigating this. Or I knew another couple who told me they were doing a fertility awareness method, and they were doing the basal body temperature, where you take your temperature orally the first thing in the morning. And she said, yep, I would wait for the temperature to peak and then we'd go for it. And I was like, oh, honey, no, by the time your temperature peaks, you've already ovulated. The temperature peaks like 24 hours after you ovulate, right? So that, you were missing every cycle. Or couples that say, we just can't get pregnant. And then you're like, oh, so, when you talk about what they do for a living, oh, well, this one is a surgical resident and she's at the hospital 80 hours a week, and he's a business guy traveling. And it's like, well, when exactly are you having sex? Like you kind of do need to have sex pretty regularly to have a baby. So, so there's all sorts of scenarios. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I got carried away there. But we didn't want people to give up when they weren't really giving up based on accurate information. Giving up based on accurate information, it's not just information externally, it's your internally, your heart. So something accurate in your heart would be like when you've really, really thought about it, you actually don't feel a drive to be a parent. You just have always gotten this message as a young child that you should be a mother. But now that you're in your 30s or 40s, you know yourself well enough and say, you know what? I'm a wonderful aunt, or I love my life and it's child-free. Like, those are good reasons to give up on having a kid, I think. Mm-hmm. But not, you just didn't have the information, or you didn't have the fortitude. It was just too hard. And fortitude isn't like, oh, they're weak. It's just, you have to build up emotional fortitude, right? You have to be able to build up emotional strength. And we give psychological and coping tools to do that.
Well, it's huge. If you're saying that to get the 80% rate, we need to be really trying for a year, and then that may include getting pregnant, having a miscarriage, starting again, hormones going up and down and making us, you know, grieve and emotion. Like, that's, I mean, I get it, what you're saying about fortitude. I just was curious, in your empirical research and questions, how common is it that women are experiencing things like fibroid cysts and endometriosis that are preventing them from getting pregnant? Just like
I don't know the percentage, but I think it's pretty common. But it's pretty common. But then again, unexplained infertility is also pretty common, or subfertility, really.
Yeah, we know about a third of infertility is female-oriented issues, a third is male-oriented issues, and a third is what they call unexplained. And something that throws off these categories too is that in the United States, if you're 35 and older, after 6 months of trying, you can get an actual ICD-9 diagnosis of infertility. But as we just said, only 60% of couples are going to be pregnant, so you're not really infertile. Then it's very misleading. It's very misleading.
Oh, that would be so unfortunate to get a so-called diagnosis, right? And it's not actually accurate. And when you're talking to women, do you find, and I'm sure it's like totally different across the board, but do you find women are feeling more confident and comfortable by tracking everything really, like down to a T, and knowing the right days? And or do you also meet women who are just like, oh my God, I tried that and it was so stressful and I'm just going to like go for it whenever I want and see when it happens? Do you, like, emotionally wise, do you hear stories about that?
Yeah, I think it can go either way. Some women find and Sharon and I were definitely in this camp where all the tracking really, it feels empowering. You feel like you're learning all these things about your body that you never knew before. But I've definitely talked to women who felt like it was just too much and was creating a lot of pressure and stressing them out. And what we say in the book is that either can work, because naturally you will have a surge in libido when you're ovulating. So if you just trust your feelings, that does work too.
That's so great. That's very lucky. So yes. This is not related necessarily to children, but if you could go back to your 25-year-old self, what would you tell her?
I just feel like I worried too much in my 20s, and I would have just said to, trust that it will work out, and, things will unfold as they're meant to unfold.
And wait for the puppy. What was your puppy's name?
Baxter. Yes, and he's at my parents today because I didn't want dogs interrupting our podcast.
Oh, poor Baxter. He wanted to be part of it. Yeah, so what about you, Sharon?
Yeah, I think along the same lines, you're going to be okay. And I think I would tell myself, you're enough. You are enough. You are perfect as is. You don't need to keep striving.
I love that. And what kind of advice would each of you give to women who are trying to get pregnant and struggling and trying to figure out what's going on, and maybe not sure, maybe I do want to get pregnant, maybe I don't know, that kind of situation? What would each of you say to that woman?
I think there's a difference if you're struggling around whether or not you want to become a mother, then I think it's important to get to the root of that. And you can do that lots of different ways. I think it basically comes down to examining like what you think, what that means to you. What does being a mother mean to you? And what are your assumptions about how your life will change if you become a mother, and then kind of reality testing those.
And you have to reality test those by having a kid though, right?
Well, we tried to provide a lot of information. I mean, it's terrible because unfortunately, I think can scare each other a lot. Like those of us who are already moms can kind of scare other women who are thinking about it. And, oh, it's so tiring and you never sleep again. And childcare is so expensive. So, which is true to some extent.
Yeah, I know a lot of women who have, their careers or their businesses, and they're worried, like, I really want to have a child, but oh my gosh, then they hear all the moms saying like, your life will change forever. It's not yours anymore. It belongs to this child forever. And so then I think they get scared, but you might just say it's a matter of getting support.
I think it's a matter of support and also being really creative, and we're all creative. One of the interesting things for me in this whole journey was becoming a writer, because I never considered myself a creative type, and now I've written all sorts of things. But you're always juggling the balls and you're catching the one that needs the most attention. But the thing is, you change the shape of the balls. And so you can still have your needs met. And by needs met, I meant physical needs, emotional needs, your aspirational needs in your career, but it's going to look different. So for me, exercise is a huge thing. And I used to go, half-hour a day run, body pump once a week, yoga once a week. Yeah, none of that now. You know what I do? I took my kids on a wagon ride around our neighborhood, and just hauling like 50 pounds a kid in a wagon up hills is a great workout. And they had a great time, and I got a workout in. Right. Professionally, I started my own business. That's something that worked for my family, and I work part-time. Emma's able to telecommute. That works for her family. So you figure out the way to do it. But I think it is important, as Emma said, to figure out, where is that ambivalence coming from? And it's 100% okay to not want kids if that's not your jam. But where is it coming from? What wounds need to be healed? What insecurities need to be addressed? And if all of that is taken care of and you still don't want a child, fine. But if it's a question of you don't feel you're good enough, or you don't feel you're capable of loving enough, then that's sad, and I would recommend at that point finding a good therapist to work with and work through that. And then I think for the struggle, like if you're actually actively trying to conceive and having a lot of trouble, I really recommend our book, Beyond the Egg Timer. But I also recommend getting in touch with Resolve, the National Fertility Organization. And for some people, really finding a good community, other women that could be supportive, and potentially also looking for a good therapist that is well-versed in infertility issues, can walk you through that.
And would you recommend the same for the woman who's like, hell yes, absolutely, I totally want to become a mother. That's like my main goal right now. And it's not working, and I'm not getting pregnant as fast as I thought I would. What would you say to that woman?
Yeah, just all of the same stuff, like connect with the National Fertility Association. And I think also one thing that I like to tell people is really, really think about space and time. Because we get really, really caught up, and I see this all the time in my clinical practice, where like, I only have 3 months, or something. And it's like, you have all the time in the world, really, you do. And if you need to take a few months off of what you're doing fertility wise to really get centered again, then it's worth it. And for some people, they're faith-based, for me, I'm a practicing Buddhist. And so getting really back into my faith, because I had lost it at a certain point in the journey, getting back into it was critical, but really understanding that nothing exists from its own side. And so like, you might think like, oh, if I'm not pregnant this year, the world ends. But really, I mean, it took my husband and I close to 3 years. So by the time our daughter was born, it was 4 years after we started the journey. I couldn't imagine it any other way. So I would tell that woman, you will be a parent some way, somehow, if you keep yourself open to the possibilities. And in the biggest possible picture, whether it takes 6 months, a year, or 2 years isn't going to matter.
Love that. And is there one last piece of advice? I know you have to go, but that each of you could share. It doesn't have to be related to child rearing, but it could be anything in life. A piece of advice that you oftentimes find yourself sharing, or something you find yourself sharing lately, even if it's not related to mothering at all.
I'm always trying to work on accepting what is, not struggling with the way things are, just accepting what is. I think that's one of the keys to joy. And from there, you can move onwards.
What about you, Sharon?
Yeah, I like that. And I think I would add compassion for yourself. So we talk to ourselves in a way we would never talk to another human being or living creature. So, what do you tell your sister when she just can't get it together? What do you tell your best friend when she just, things aren't working out for her? And treat yourself with that kindness and compassion.
Wow, love that. Thank you both so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I want to share your website. So for those of you who want more information, go to Beyond the Egg Timer. That's such a great name. How did you guys come up with that name?
Crowdsourcing.
Yes, that's the best. I love that. So beyondtheeggtimer.com/the book to find more information about the book. That's the companion guide for having babies in your mid-30s and older. I love it. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Katie. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.